Hi guys, it's me ChazzaHD and welcome to another stream here on the channel. Of course, kicking off we are tonight the 2023 Canadian Grand Prix weekend around the Circuit De Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada. Great to see you guys here as usual. Hope you've had a good last, how long has it been? Nearly 2 weeks since the last Grand Prix. Yeah, hope you've all done well, or I hope you're all, doing okay. And given whatever situations are going on in your lives or whatever situations are going on in the part of the world you're from, hope you're all having as best a time right now as possible. In my part of the world, it is, for where I live, incredibly hot and dry. My part of the UK, I don't think it has rained properly for nearly 2 months. It's been incredible, the weather we've had since the start of May, and at the minute it is incredibly hot, incredibly humid again for the UK, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere at least for another 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, just incredible summer so far. Of course, though, the weather situation in Canada has not been the greatest. They did have some wildfires. I think quite a lot of wildfires in Canada. I think it was a week or so ago. I'm not sure if they started up a week or so ago, but I know that they started. The mist, I guess you could call it, started to spread to other parts of the of Canada, but also even into northern United States, New York City, for example, even Washington DC. So, yeah, we had that go on in Canada. But looking at the weather for this weekend, it does look like we have a pretty decent chance of rain every single day of the weekend. Tomorrow is probably a 30% chance. And then Friday and Saturday, I would say, or no, not Friday and Saturday, Saturday and Sunday, rather. It looks like it's at least a 50-50 as to whether it will rain or not on both Saturday and Sunday. So it could be a truly memorable weekend here in Canada. Even if it's dry, though, I think we're going to get an exciting weekend. It's very competitive right now in Formula One, except for, of course, the competition for first place. But, from, say, third place down through the field, it is incredibly close right now in Formula One. So yeah, wet or dry, it's going to be an exciting weekend in Montreal. And of course, in this preview, I'll go through the usual stuff that I go through. Get into the, map of the track, talk about, what teams I think will go well around this certain track layout we have here in Canada. And then, of course, I'll get into my early coming into the weekend qualifying and race predictions. Of course, they're not my final predictions for qualifying and the race. I will give my final predictions for those later on in the weekend. And then, of course, I'll get into the teams respectively and get a bit more in detail as to why I think they'll end up the results that I've gone with. And I will also let you guys know about upgrades, because even though I won't be able to show you any visually, because we haven't yet got a proper idea of who has brought upgrades and how many of them, I can let you know that there are 2 or 3 teams, at least I've heard of, that are bringing upgrades to this race this weekend. And one team, being Aston Martin, apparently bringing quite a big upgrade package for this weekend's race. So yeah, we'll get into that soon enough. To be honest though, even with upgrades for certain teams, around this track, it's not really going to have a massive effect, because there's not really... the first sector, you've got quite a few corners in quite a short amount of time, but this isn't really an aerodynamic type track where it's, aerodynamic heavy. It's really, the most important thing is how much straight line speed you can have. Good straight line speed, of course, you can have to get good results, because you don't have to necessarily have the car with the most downforce, of course, around this circuit. to be the quickest or one of the quickest, you have to have really the right combination of good downforce, but also good straight line speed. So, yeah, I don't think upgrades are going to have really a massive effect on this weekend. I mean, it will definitely have an effect, but, nothing massive. And I think we'll see more of the effects of these upgrades probably in 3 weeks' time at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, which is a good circuit to see who has improved their car or not, with aerodynamic upgrades and even chassis upgrades as well. But yeah, we'll get into all of that, of course, in tonight's stream. One thing I will do quickly is I will ask you guys in the chat. I should have done this, of course, before I started. Let me just set this poll up. I'm going to ask you guys, who do you think will most likely finish third at the Canadian GP? Because, of course, we know who's going to win the race this weekend. Wet or dry, it's going to be Max Verstappen and the Red Bull. I'd be very surprised if anyone else was able to stop the Red Bull team, especially Max Verstappen, in the form and mood he's in. So the options for who will finish third will be Leclerc, Alonso, Hamilton, and I'll throw Russell in there as well. Of course, he had a podium in Spain. So, yeah, through the stream, let me know, who do you think most likely finishes third at the Canadian Grand Prix? I'll give you my early prediction coming into the weekend as to who I think will finish third soon enough. But before we get into this weekend, let's have a look at the championship standings coming out the Spanish Grand Prix, because we didn't quite look at that after the last race about 11 days ago. So Max Verstappen is 63 points clear of Sergio Perez, quite far clear now. Of course, Perez has only scored 12 points from the last 2 races before this weekend. Perez in quite bad form, and Verstappen, of course, has won both the last 2 races and one in Miami as well. So, yeah, 3 wins in a row at the minute for Max Verstappen. Championship, of course, is over. There's no way Max Verstappen is going to be stopped. And it's just a matter of time as to when he wins the championship, and probably will win it sometime in September. We'll see exactly when. Perez is second and only, 18 points clear of Fernando Alonso in third. So Perez really does need to step up those performances, because he doesn't want to be sliding back towards Alonso, Hamilton, and even Russell in the championship. And Perez should be clearly finishing in second place and shouldn't have to worry about Alonso and Hamilton behind him. So, yeah, Perez not having a good time right now. Alonso in third on 99 points, and then you got Hamilton fourth, only 12 points behind. I've got to say, Alonso and Hamilton have both been very good this season, and they definitely deserve to be where they are in the championship at the very least. George Russell is in P5 with Carlos Sainz in P6. Charles Leclerc in 7th place. Of course, he did not score a single point in Spain. And Charles Leclerc has not actually finished in the top 5 of a race since Baku. Because in Miami, he finished in 7th, I think it was. And then in Monaco, he finished in 6th. And of course, he finished 11th in Spain. So Leclerc is having a really bad season. Not all because of him, but yeah, it's having a very bad season. Lance Stroll not too far behind him. Of course, it's Lance's home race this weekend in Canada. And yeah, he's 8th in the championship, just 7 points behind Leclerc. Ocon only 10 points behind Stroll in 9th, with Pierre Gasly a further 10 points behind in P10. And on the constructors side, we do have a position change, which is Mercedes going up to 2nd. Red Bull, though, are now 135 points clear of Mercedes, who, yeah, are now 18 points clear of Aston Martin. Of course, Mercedes scored 33 points in Spain. Aston Martin only scored 14. And going into the Spanish Grand Prix, Mercedes were only a point behind. So Lance Stroll really needs to step up his performances on a more consistent basis if Aston Martin are going to get back into second place in the championship. Of course, Stroll did well in Spain. I don't think you can ask any more of Stroll from what he did in Spain, but yeah, second place is definitely a position that Aston Martin, need to reclaim very quickly. Ferrari are in fourth place, exactly on 100 points, but 52 points behind Mercedes in second. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'll get onto Ferrari, of course, soon, Ferrari's season for me is just, it's over. There's nothing really to gain from this season. Their car is pretty bad. It's just not a good car whatsoever. The only positive is that when qualifying comes around, most of the time they can muster up a good lap to put them in good positions, but then they continuously fail to deliver any sort of good race result. So yeah, Ferrari, as far as I'm concerned, their season is over. And also, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think they have any chance of finishing higher than fourth in the championship. I know they're not that far behind points-wise of the two teams ahead of them, but with the way the momentum is going, and with their upgrade in the last Grand Prix not improving the pace of their car in comparison to Aston Martin and Ferrari, and Mercedes, sorry, not Ferrari, I just don't see where they're going. I really don't see where they're going at all. Alpine are 60 points behind in fifth place, with McLaren in sixth on 17 points. Haas and Alfa Romeo joint on 8 points, but Haas still ahead because they have the best race result, or better best race result than Alfa Romeo do. I think Haas's best race result was 7th, I think, in Australia with Hulkenberg, if I remember correctly. And then AlphaTauri are in 9th, with Williams in P10. Now let's get on to the track itself. Here is the Circuit De Gilles Villeneuve. Of course, the yellow is the first sector, the red is the middle sector, and the blue is the final sector. But for the first sector, you can see, of course, you come off the very fast final chicane down to turn 1, which is quite fast, and then into a hairpin-like turn 2. And then once you exit that corner, you have a very fast chicane of turn, was it 3 and 4, where Sebastian Vettel, of course, famously or infamously, went off and ended up getting a penalty for coming back in a dangerous manner, according to the stewards. And then, yeah, for the first sector, it is the most aerocentric, I guess you could say, part of the track, where, if you do have good downforce, it will really show in the first sector. Or if you try to set your car up with a bit more downforce than others, if others decide to, trim some wing off to be quick in a straight line, again, your better downforce will show, or should show, in the first sector. Then you have a bit of a slowish entry to the next chicane, starting the middle sector. Then the first DRS straight, going into another chicane, basically. And then another straight going up to the end of the middle sector. And then the final sector is a hairpin, a very long straight where DRS is enabled for almost all of it. And then the final chicane, which is pretty fast. And then another straight where DRS is enabled to the finish line. So for the majority of the lap, it's about straight line speed. In the first sector, I expect it to be pretty close between a lot of the teams, but there should be certain teams showing well in that first sector. And of course, what I like to do is, when we come to a new Grand Prix for the season, is compare a sector to a similar-ish sector we've recently been to, or had a track we've recently been to in Formula 1. And the only sector from this circuit here this weekend that I've decided to compare to a recent one is the middle sector in Barcelona. And you can see at the last Grand Prix in that middle sector, which is, you've got one slow corner, and the rest of the corners are medium to high speed, which again I'd say is the most similar to that first sector in or at this track here in Canada. Red Bull were miles quicker than everybody else, a quarter of a second quicker, just under half a minute. The next car being the Mercedes, which of course showed much better performance in Spain with their new side pod upgrade and suspension and all of that. And I do think Mercedes will show very strongly in the first sector. Alpine and Aston Martin also looking good. McLaren looking pretty decent as well. McLaren, though, as I'll get onto later, don't think they're going to be very quick at all this weekend. Ferrari, though, really did not look very good in that first sector. But thankfully for them, with them having quite a powerful engine and with, 2/3 of the track being dominated by straights, really, it's really going to help them for qualifying, especially if it's dry, them having that powerful engine, because they won't have to necessarily have a car that is absolutely exhilarating through the corners. And then after that, you had Haas, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, and Williams were quite clearly the slowest team in that middle sector. So when it comes to the first sector in Canada, yeah, Red Bull I expect to be clearly the best team through there. Then probably followed by Mercedes, Aston Martin, Alpine, Ferrari, McLaren, and then, your Haas's, AlphaTauri, so on and so forth. But for the rest of the lap, again, I've not decided to compare the second or final sector here in Canada to a sector we've recently been to, because I couldn't really find from Monaco or Spain a sector that is really similar enough. Really, to look at who's going to be good in those sectors, you need to just look at who has so far this season displayed the best straight line speed on a consistent basis, and those teams have been Red Bull, Williams, Ferrari, Haas, Alpine. Pretty much, yeah, those, I think 5 teams I've just listed off there. And Alfa Romeo to a certain extent as well. So the Ferrari-powered teams, Williams and Red Bull, are the teams that normally are the top 5 best teams in a straight line. So you can expect those teams to be a bit stronger this weekend, maybe than what they were in Spain. But yeah, should be, with how short the lap is as well, pole position should be, around like a 1 minute 10, 1 minute 9, something like that. Yeah, it should be a very close field through the entirety of the field, even with the gap from pole position, which will probably be held by Max Verstappen, going down to, 3rd, 4th, 5th place. It'll be a lot closer than you would normally expect, again, because of the shortened lap. But yeah, given the the track we're at this weekend and who is sitting in what position in Formula One at the minute, and how everyone is just doing at the minute with their cars, with the new upgrades they're bringing, let's get into my initial qualifying and race predictions for this weekend's race. And of course, you can let me know in the chat whether you agree or disagree with my predictions. So for qualifying, I think it will be a Red Bull front row. Verstappen on pole, of course, from Sergio Perez in second. Charles Leclerc, I'm going to go third. That is purely because I think Ferrari will have just too much pace in the middle and the final sector in a straight line for Aston Martin or Mercedes to be able to get ahead of them in qualifying. And Leclerc, I do think, will be back at it this weekend. It was revealed, actually, that the problem with Leclerc's car in the last Grand Prix was, they believe, it's not been factually proven, but they believe that it is setup related rather than it actually being a problem with the chassis or the car in general. So yeah, that's definitely a worry if you're a Leclerc or Ferrari fan, that maybe that'll happen again here in Canada. But this track just in general suits Ferrari's car way more than what we saw in Barcelona. So yeah, Leclerc just about will get on to third place. Just behind, though, will be Alonso in fourth, with Hamilton fifth, Carlos Sainz in sixth. The reason I've got Alonso ahead of Hamilton, despite Mercedes' better showing in Spain, is because Aston Martin, not Ting, are bringing upgrades this weekend, which I think will just increase the pace around this track enough for Alonso and Aston Martin to get a bit more on terms with Mercedes. And I think that Alonso will be absolutely at it this weekend. He's always been Alonso, super, super quick around this track. I know Hamilton has, of course, as well. But I just think for this type of track layout that Aston Martin will have with their new upgrades, that obviously we have to see if they do work or not. I'm assuming they will. That's why I'm making these predictions. I think Aston Martin will have just about enough of a car to see Alonso qualifying 4th place. But it will be very, very close from not just 4th down, but even 3rd place down. It's going to be very close and very hard to predict, really, from 3rd down to P10 and even further down than that, I think you could argue. So yeah, I'm going to go Alonso 4th, Hamilton 5th. Hamilton will have a very good weekend in terms of his pace, and Mercedes will be not as quick as they were at the Circuit de Catalunya, because I think that track layout just suits their car better than this one. But they will still be competitive, only really because Lewis Hamilton is one of the best, if not the best driver ever to race around this track. He's obviously won this race, I think, 7 times previously as Lewis Hamilton. So, yeah, got to watch out for him, of course. Carlos Sainz will be in 6th, with Esteban Ocon in 7th and George Russell in 8th. The reason I've gone with Ocon in 7th is because he is also a driver that has shown in the past here to be pretty quick around this track. You could argue in 2017, before Scuderia, that if Perez had let him through, Ocon might have actually gotten the podium that day because his pace was very strong. I think 2018 he finished in the points here. Last year he finished 6th for Alpine. So yeah, I think Ocon will be right in there in the fight this weekend, picking up some good positions for Alpine. George Russell, even though he finished 3rd in Spain, I think we have to remember that Russell, as of late, has not been that good in qualifying. He was 12th in Spain, 8th in Monaco, 6th or 7th in Miami, and then 11th in Baku. He's not really been very good at all in qualifying as of late. In the races, though, he's, done much better. Obviously, in Miami, he went on to finish in 4th. Obviously, last Grand Prix in Spain, he finished in 3rd. In Monaco, he would have finished in 3rd if he did not go off at Mirabeau after his pit stop. So, yeah, his race performances are, I don't think you can ask any more of him for what he's doing in the race. But in qualifying at the minute, yeah, he's not doing that well. So I think he will struggle yet again and qualify down in 8th place. Lance Stroll, I'm going to go down in 9th. I just think Stroll's, lack of ability compared to the others in the top 10 over a single lap compared to a race situation, I think will cost him quite dearly. And that's why I think he'll qualify down in 9th place, despite it being his home Grand Prix. And Pierre Gasly, I think, will round out the top 10. Now, let's get into my race prediction. And of course, I've gone for the predicted gaps. I think it'll be between, first all the way down to P10. And of course, these predictions as well is done based off if it is a dry weekend. This is not whether it's a wet weekend. It's based on if it's a dry weekend. So I think Max Verstappen will dominate and win the race by a country mile. Sergio Perez will be 2nd by a country mile. Fernando Alonso will just about hold off Lewis Hamilton. Those two are going to be very close to each other this weekend in 2 cars that are very similarly matched. And Alonso and Hamilton are both very quick around this track. They've always been very quick at this circuit, no matter what car they've been driving. So yeah, that's going to be a really good fight to watch out for here in Canada. But Alonso will, because he'll get ahead in qualifying, I think he will be able to hold on ahead of Hamilton, finishing 3rd. And then, Hamilton, I'm going to go in 4th. Leclerc will finish in 5th, with George Russell in 6th. Lance Stroll, I'm going to go in 7th. He'll have a better race performance because he is just better in the races. And then I'll go Ocon in 8th place, with Carlos Sainz in 9th and Pierre Gasly in P10. And if these results were to happen, Of course, Verstappen and Red Bull would pull away massively in the championship. Aston Martin would score 21 points from the weekend, and Mercedes would score 20 points. Yeah, so nothing really would change in terms of the championship if these results were to play out. And yeah, that's what I think coming into the weekend, how it will go. Let me know, guys, in the live chat and in the poll at the top of the chat whether you agree or disagree with my predictions. Before, though, I get onto the teams and get a bit more in depth about how I think they, or why I think they'll come to the results they're going to come to this weekend. Let me just remind you guys of the schedule, the next 2 pieces of content coming on the channel. So tomorrow night, I will be live at 9:45 p.m. UK time to do a watch-along for Practice 2 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Of course, 15 minutes before Practice 2 is when I'll be going live. That's why it's 9:45 p.m. And then for Saturday, qualifying day, I will be doing a Practice 3 watch-along, qualifying preview, and qualifying watch-along on Saturday. And I'll be going live from 5:15 p.m. UK time all the way through until 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night. So make sure to join me for that. And of course, on Sunday, I'll be live, I think, from 5 p.m. UK time all the way through till 9:30 p.m. at least, to do the race preview and race watch-along. And one thing I can announce, I have said in the last few weeks that I'll do a Monday stream if there's enough, content from the race. I can announce that whether there is enough content from the race or not, I will be doing a stream on Monday night, obviously F1 related, whether it's talking about, a topic for the season so far or looking at something from the race. I will be doing a stream on Monday night. I guess at the minute you could call it a Canadian GP weekend review, and that'll be 8 p.m. UK time on Monday evening. So if you want to join for that content, make sure to subscribe and hit your notifications bell if you are new to the channel. And as well, if I'm watching right now, don't forget to smash the like button. We're currently on 19 likes. Now we're on 21 likes. That's good to see. Yeah, let's try and get up to 30 plus likes if we can in the next half an hour or so. That'd be good if we could do that. But what do you call it? I'm just looking on Twitter to see if there's any current F1 news. I think the F1 driver press conferences are going on at the minute. Of course, they're on a much different time zone to how we were, in Europe a couple of weeks ago. So I'll see if anything interesting comes out of that. But yeah, I think we'll just get into the teams and get, again, into more detail as to why I think they'll end up the results that I'm going for. Of course, as we go through the teams, guys, let me know in the chat your thoughts for each team and driver. And I'll get to your comments soon enough. But we'll start, of course, with Red Bull Racing. Not much to say about them. Max Verstappen is going to obliterate everyone again this weekend. The only thing really to look at of interest is Sergio Perez, because last 2 races he's been quite poor. Let me just go back onto Perez. If I can. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Perez last 2 races has been pretty poor, even in Spain. I know he came back to finish in 4th place, but that still wasn't the type of result he should have been getting. He should have been finishing in 2nd place. No excuses whatsoever. And of course, 11th in qualifying was a horrendous performance by him. So yeah, the only thing to look out for is, will Perez be really bad again, or will he get back up to the level he was at, say 6-7 weeks ago when we were in Baku, where of course he won that race from Max Verstappen. Of course, he's not going to do that this weekend because Verstappen does have a bit of a weakness around the Baku track compared to Perez, but that doesn't exist for this circuit this weekend. And with Perez, if he is struggling, then really the drivers we can expect him to fight are probably, in qualifying, Leclerc, Alonso, Hamilton. And probably fighting with Alonso and Hamilton for second and third place in the race. Again, if he is struggling with his performance and just his confidence in the car. I think with Perez, I think what has caused this loss of confidence, I don't think it's him struggling with the car setup or anything like that. I think it's what happened. Right, I think we're back on now, as I might have just disconnected for you guys. I'm not sure if I have or not. Yeah, let me know in the chat whether I'm still on or not. I just saw that I disconnected a couple times. So yeah, just put in the chat. So, put yes if I'm still streaming and you can still hear me and there's no issues. That'd be good if you guys... Right, as I've reconnected again. For some reason, my internet keeps going on and off. Don't know why. I've not had that happen before. But if it happens again, I'll have to, I don't know, fiddle around with the router or something like that. Yeah, apologies about that, guys. Yeah, so as I was saying with Sergio Perez, the reason he has been terrible in the last couple races, again, I don't think it's because of car setup and he's struggling to set the car up in the way he likes. It's because of what happened in Miami, where he started in pole position. Max started in 9th place, I think it was. And Perez, I think, rightfully assumed he would win the race because Red Bull had clearly the best car and Max was, too far back. But for Verstappen to do what he did and destroy Perez, essentially. I know he only finished a few seconds ahead of Perez, but let's be honest, he destroyed him. He was so much better than Perez in that race because, to win comfortably from 9th on the grid like he did is just an incredible performance from Verstappen. And I think since then, and because of that performance by Verstappen, Perez has now just been mentally crushed by him. Because I think before that race in Miami, I think Perez genuinely thought he had a chance at beating Max in 2023. But after that race, I think he has, I think self-doubt might have creeped in as to whether he can not only compete with Max, whether he can get anywhere near him. And that is a hallmark of a top driver, what Max Verstappen did, crushing Perez like that. I think Martin Brundle has said on Sky F1 before that, how much you would hate to be the teammate of Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton because 80% of the time you're getting absolutely destroyed and you have to be very mentally strong to still be consistently good for a few years, despite getting, hammered each weekend most of the time by your teammate. And that's what separates the absolute best from, good drivers like Sergio Perez. But I think, again, that's why Perez has been struggling as he has. I think mentally has lost a lot of confidence because of what happened in Miami. And it probably won't come back for a few more races, but we'll see. We'll see how, he gets on this weekend and see whether he can actually, put in a performance that maybe makes him believe that, he can fight with Max a bit more than he has been, of course, in the last couple races. But yeah, hopefully my internet now should be all okay. I think that was just a momentary thing. Normally it happens during the night, the early hours of the morning, but annoyingly decided to happen right when I did not need it to happen, as usual. Anyway, let's go on to the other teams. And next up, we will go on to the Scuderia Ferrari team, who have, just no hope at all, really, in 2023. The car, the drivers are very unhappy with. Even the the engineers are unhappy with, because despite it showing good pace on a Saturday, on a Sunday, not only is it slow, I don't even think Ferrari understand completely as to why it is slow. because they've got so many issues with the car. Not just the way the car's built that wears out the tires so much more than other teams wear out their tires, but I think even Carlos Sainz talked about it, and I think Leclerc talked about it a few weeks ago as well. This Ferrari car has an issue where in the race, the drivers and the engineers do not know what to expect when they move on to a different tyre at any point during a race. Leclerc said it, I think, brilliantly in Spain after the race, that when he started on the hard tyre, because his strategy was hard, then he went onto the soft and then finished on the hard tyre. He said that the first stint on the hard tyre, the car felt terrible, but then when he went onto the hard tyre again to finish the race, he said it felt like a completely different car. And that has been a common complaint by the Ferrari drivers ever since even Bahrain, that the car, every time they put on either a new set of tyres or a fresher set of the same compound, the car just feels completely different from what it should feel like. And they have no just confidence really in this car. So there are a multitude of issues. And of course, this new sidepod upgrade they brought to the Spanish Grand Prix hasn't improved the pace of their car at all from what we've seen so far. So yeah, Ferrari are just at an absolute crossroads in 2023. And as far as I'm concerned, with where they are in the championship and how far behind they are already compared to Mercedes, who are second in the championship, I think Ferrari should give up on this year's car, just focus on next year's car, because what are they going to gain from this season? Even with them being fourth in the championship, and with the wind tunnel, or the ATR as they call it for short, with the wind tunnel testing order, I guess you could call it, being reset on June the 30th based on the constructors' standings on June the 30th. Ferrari, of course, going to be in fourth place. And yes, they will have a bit extra development time compared to Mercedes and Red Bull, of course. But what really are they going to gain from that? Maybe 2 or 3 tenths of a second at most between now and the end of the season, and maybe they might be able to win one race this season. That's not really, something to... I just don't think there's any point continuing to develop this car if that is really the absolute best you can fight for the remainder of this season. And I know Ferrari definitely do not want to go through the entire of 2023 without winning a race. But even if they were to completely or to continue focusing on this year's car and its development and develop it as much as they could financially until they hit the cap, then I don't think it necessarily means they're going to be in a position at all to win a race. So I just don't see what there is to gain out of 2023 anymore. And I think fundamental changes to the technical element of the car, the design of the car, the chassis design, all of that, I think that's what needs to be the main focus right now at the Ferrari team, rather than looking for short-term fixes or short-term improvements, because short-term improvements are going to do nothing. Absolutely nothing. This team, since the start of last season, where they had the best car at the start of these regulations, they have progressively gone backwards. And now they're the fourth best team, when 15 months ago, they were the best team in terms of performance. So, yeah, I just don't see what else there is to gain this season. And I know, if they were to just stop development on this year's car and focus on next year and try and get ahead on next year's car compared to other teams in terms of focusing earlier than, say, Aston Martin and Mercedes will on next year's car. I just think that'd be a better option for them than, you know, continuing to develop what is a pretty mediocre Ferrari car. And I think, you know, there is a risk, of course, that if they were to stop development, that they would slip into the midfield. How do we know they won't slip into the midfield anyway? Because if you look at this season, they were the second best team, maybe not in terms of race pace, but they were quite quick in Bahrain and were pretty much in qualifying, and you could argue the race as well to a certain extent, the second best team, because let's remember, of course, Leclerc was running in third and was comfortably in third before his engine failed. Yeah, they were second best in Bahrain, and now they're the fourth best, and at times you could argue fifth best, because Alpine are now, you know, in there fighting with them, as you can see on your screen here. Pierre Gasly, I think that was, just behind Charles Leclerc. Gasly, of course, beating Leclerc in Spain. So, yeah, I just don't see what else there is to gain for Ferrari in the rest of 2023. I mean, you could make this argument with Mercedes and Aston Martin as well. The difference is Mercedes, their new sidepod upgrade, which is, and the new suspension upgrade as well, which is a massive upgrade, has clearly worked. It's clearly made the car 2 or 3 tenths of a second quicker than what we saw previously. With Ferrari, they've made a not as big but similar upgrade, and they, you know, brought it to the track, and it's not improved their car. So I just don't see, with them, I mean, pretty close probably at this point of the season to hitting the cap limit, I just don't see what else they can really gain from this season, because, I mean, Ferrari have probably got room for one more big upgrade in 2023, and if that doesn't work, then, you know, it's a load of money wasted on, you know, nothing really. So yeah, Ferrari in a dire situation, as as I've said, fourth in the championship, and there is absolutely no way they're finishing third or second. It's not happening. They don't have the car. Both drivers as well aren't exactly performing that well. I mean, Carlos Sainz has not had that bad of a season. He's definitely started this year a lot better than how he started 2022. But yeah, nothing is going right at this team at the minute. But I do think, because of this track layout that we're at this weekend, I do think Ferrari will still be competitive in qualifying. Charles Leclerc, I'll go back onto him. Hold on, there you go. Yeah, I think he'll be third on the grid. I think he will still get back to his usual greatness over a single lap, and Ferrari will have a good car for this track in terms of what we're going to see in qualifying. But of course, for the race, there's just no way of them finishing on the podium. I just don't see it happening whatsoever, because fundamentally they have a broken car right now. And my prediction, as I showed earlier, for this team is 5th and 9th, which would be pretty much in line with the last couple race results they've had in Spain and Monaco. This team just nowhere at the minute. But let's go on to the next team, Mercedes-Benz. And yeah, Mercedes look a lot better. Sorry, a lot better than how they looked before that sidepod upgrade came in Monaco. The car's clearly improved by, like I said a moment ago, 2 to 3 tenths of a second. There's no doubt about that whatsoever, because a double podium was not possible even with one of the Red Bulls having issues. It wasn't really possible, except for Australia, I guess you could say, but that was just one race. All the other races, it just wasn't possible for Mercedes to be in a position like that, and they were quite clearly not up for debate, the second best team in the race in Spain. So, yeah, looking great for them. Great to see them improving so much. But this is a usual thing with Mercedes. I looked at their upgrades from last year. I think I did a stream at the end of last season and talked about how even during 2022, despite starting the year off with a pretty bad car for their standards, they improved that car a lot, and they weren't very far away from Red Bull at the end of 2022. But because, obviously, they started this season with the same failed concept, they wasted a few months of time they could have used to really close in on the Red Bull team, which is sad. But yeah, with Mercedes, one thing I do want to point out before we get into how they'll do this weekend is I have seen a bit of an overreaction online in regards to Mercedes' improvements. They have definitely improved. They're definitely closer to Red Bull. There is no doubt about that. But they are not. They're still nowhere near. They're still nowhere near Red Bull. It's not even close. I know people in Spain or from the Spanish Grand Prix will think, oh, they're not actually that far away. They only finished 23 seconds behind. Two things you have to take into account when looking at that 23-second gap between Verstappen and Hamilton. One, Max Verstappen and Red Bull, I don't believe, really pushed at all during that race. I think they were just really, they didn't really use the higher engine modes, or they just weren't pushing hard whatsoever during that race, because Verstappen had already got pole position, had held on just about to the lead on the first lap from Carlos Sainz, and after that, Red Bull knew they had easily enough pace to pull away from the rest of the field and win easily without having to stress their car out too much and their power unit out too much. So I just don't believe Red Bull and Verstappen were pushing at all, pushing as much as Mercedes were in Spain. Another thing we have to remember, which I don't understand that why people haven't talked about this from the Spanish Grand Prix, but with the track layout being a lot shorter at the Circuit de Catalunya now, with those final two fast corners being added rather than the very pedestrian slow final chicane, it's a pretty short lap now in Spain, and we've seen in Monaco, we'll see it this weekend in Canada. Obviously, it's an extreme example when you look at the Red Bull Ring in Austria or Interlagos in Brazil. But when you have a short track layout, the gaps between the cars appear a lot closer than they actually are in reality. And that's one thing that people have to remember with Mercedes in Spain. Yes, they were the second best team in Spain in the race. There is no doubt about that. But they were nowhere near Red Bull. Let's be clear on that. Red Bull were in a different universe to them, because even around a short layout, Max was still 23 seconds clear. And again, I do not believe, you may say that I don't have the evidence to say this, but I think most likely what I'm saying is true, because it's been proven from other dominant, teams in just the past few years, that if you're miles ahead of the rest of the field, you're going to turn down your engine settings, fuel settings quite a lot more than other teams who have to push a bit harder to finish in the positions they're going to get. I just don't believe they're, not that far away from Red Bull, which certain people online were definitely making statements like that they aren't actually, as far away as people think, or that maybe that they gained, way more time on Red Bull than maybe we previously thought was possible. That is not the case. Red Bull are still miles clear of Mercedes, and it will take Mercedes quite a long time to get to a point where they are either, not too far away from Red Bull, or on the same pace as Red Bull. It's still going to take quite a long time. So, yeah, I just want to be clear on that because I think people were reading a bit too much into that gap and maybe their good pace at times in Spain compared to Red Bull and the Red Bull of Verstappen. When again, Verstappen just, I don't think, was pushing whatsoever in that race. For this weekend, though, this track layout does not suit this car as well as the Circuit de Catalunya. I think that track just suits them a lot better. You know, a fast flowing track rather than a track that is a bit more stop-starty like this one, where you have a long straight, slow corner, long straight, you know, stuff like that. And yeah, I just don't think Mercedes will have a car that, compared to the rest of the field, will be as well performing as what we saw in Spain. And really, their main hope, Mercedes, if they're going to get on the podium again, is Lewis Hamilton, because he's won his 7 times previously and is arguably the best driver ever to race around this circuit. Of course, he won here on his debut at this Canadian Grand Prix. It was, his 6th race of his F1 career, and he won pretty comfortably from the rest of the field and had a brilliant pole position as well. So, yeah, Lewis Hamilton, I think, you know, he will definitely be very strong this weekend. And as long as he can produce the goods that normally he does around this circuit, he will be in the top 5 really the whole weekend. You know, practice, qualifying, race, doesn't matter. He'll be always up there fighting for, say, a top 3 position. And I think the reason, again, he misses out is because Aston Martin, if their big upgrade for this weekend does work, which I'm assuming it will, I think that'll put Aston Martin right back in the fight with Mercedes, as opposed to what we saw in Spain. And Alonso will be having a much better weekend than what he had at his home race 2 weeks ago. And Alonso, this is probably one of his best tracks on the calendar, along with Hamilton, of course, but I just think, yeah, Alonso and that Aston Martin will do just about enough to end up ahead of the Mercedes of Hamilton. But yeah, if you're a Mercedes fan, I wouldn't say come into the weekend with much lower expectations than what we saw in Spain. I still think, you know, there is definitely a decent chance, if not a good chance, of Mercedes finishing on the podium, but just don't think to yourself that it is going to be as easy as it was in Spain. Because in Spain, if you look back at that race, it was pretty easy for them to finish on the podium. Hamilton, after his poor, well, it wasn't a poor start, but, you know, got passed by Stroll on the first lap and he was in 4th place. Once he then passed Lance Stroll and then got to his first pit stop, after that, he obviously very quickly passed Carlos Sainz and easily finished in 2nd. And George Russell just flew his way through the field and finished in 3rd pretty comfortably. I just don't think it's going to be that easy for them this weekend. So yeah, harder weekend for them. But no doubt Mercedes have made good improvements. And when we get to what is for their, considering where their team base is, their home race at Silverstone, I do expect Mercedes to bring another big upgrade and to close the gap even further to Red Bull. But I think in comparison to Red Bull, the closest I can see them getting to Red Bull by the end of the season is like 1/3 of a second, which is not a million miles away from Red Bull. But yeah, I don't think you'll see them on the same pace as Red Bull at, you know, say the last few races of the season. Maybe it's certain tracks, but not, yeah, at every race. But they're definitely heading in the right direction. There is zero doubt about that. Let's get on to the next couple front-running teams. Aston Martin. And yeah, big upgrades for Aston Martin. I have seen on Twitter that they have a new floor for the Aston Martin, or the Aston Martin have brought this weekend. And people are maybe thinking that a new sidepod is coming as well, because normally with these cars, when they bring a new floor or they redesign the floor, they'll, you know, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they'll, you know, make an alteration to the sidepod to go along with that, because of course they're all interacting with each other to make the car as quick as it is. So we'll see exactly what all the upgrades are. Of course, tomorrow we will officially find out what every team has brought upgrades-wise. But the upgrades we've heard about is, Aston Martin apparently are bringing a big upgrade. Alpine apparently are bringing some parts. And Williams apparently have a chassis upgrade, which will be good to see, because that will be Williams' probably first big upgrade of the season. It will only, though, be on Alex Albon's car, that upgrade. But we'll see the official confirmation tomorrow. And then I'll probably get into it on Saturday as we build up to qualifying to see what teams have brought what. But if this upgrade for Aston Martin does work for them, then I think they'll be way stronger than they were in Spain. I think in Spain, it is still pretty hard to say why they was not competitive, because they were definitely not as quick as Mercedes or even Ferrari, because Carlos Sainz comfortably finished in 5th ahead of the two Aston Martins. And it was just a very strange race for them to be so slow, because normally they're one of the best teams out there in a race situation. I think with Alonso, I think it's probably still because of the broken floor he had from qualifying, and I think there was probably still some damage to that car that we saw. But yeah, in terms of knowing for sure why they were so slow, again, it is still pretty hard to say. But if we don't see a replication of that this weekend, then they should be right back on the pace that we normally, or that, we come to expect from them, which is them to be kind of in there, in a decent position in qualifying, and then be very strong in the race. For this weekend, though, if this upgrade does improve their car, which I believe it will, I think Fernando Alonso will get into 4th place on the grid, just ahead of Hamilton and just behind the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. And then he will do enough to finish in 3rd place, because I think the Aston Martin will have just about enough race pace to see Alonso get yet another podium in 2023. And for Lance Stroll, as I said earlier, I just don't think in qualifying, where he'll need to be very good if he's to get a good race result, and given how close it's going to be between, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, Alpine, I just don't believe he will be good enough in qualifying, and that'll really cost him quite a good, say, grid position for the race, and eliminate really any good chance of a really good result from his home race. But hope I'm wrong with Stroll. I mean, he did perform well in Spain, but again, I think that's more so because of Alonso breaking his floor, which again, as I said at the last Grand Prix, it was Alonso's fault, because obviously he went off the track at the final corner. But yeah, I still think Aston Martin, I think they'll be fine. I don't think what happened in the last Grand Prix is something that's just going to carry over to this race. And I think you'll see Alonso and the team right back at it, fighting for best of the rest, really, after Red Bull Racing. And the final front-running team we'll go on to before we come on to your comments in the chat is Alpine. And even though I did hype them up a bit a couple of weeks ago as to, how I thought they would do here in Canada, if you look at my predictions, you would think that, I've cooled down on my hype, I guess, for Alpine at the minute. If I go back to my qualifying predictions, I mean, I've gone Ocon 7th, Gasly 8th, but if you look at the gaps, if those gaps do, let's say, theoretically, it turns out that this is the exact order and the gaps are pretty much as I've predicted, that's still pretty good for Alpine to be pretty much on the same pace as Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes. The big difference, and I've said it so many times this season, I'll say it again, they do not have a proper top driver in this car to get the best out of the Alpine. And that is the biggest reason they will not be getting a properly good result this weekend, in my opinion. Of course, we'll see. how they do in practice to see whether I'm proved wrong or not. And I hope I am proved wrong, because it has been very exciting to see Alpine in, really good positions in the last few races. But Esteban Ocon, I think, and I'll go back to Alpine now rather than this slide. With Esteban Ocon, I'll go back onto him. He has always been fast around this circuit. Again, as I said earlier, for Force India, could have finished on the podium here if Perez had let him through to have a go at Daniel Ricciardo, and maybe you could argue would have got a podium. I'm not sure he would have, but definitely was possible. No doubt about it. He had very good pace that weekend and in that race. But even with Ocon, consistently being quick here, I still don't think that's going to be enough for Ocon to be a top 5 contender for qualifying or the race. Again, I hope I'm wrong. Hope Alpine are a tad better than I'm expecting them to be, but I just don't see them being, quite up there in the top 5 with Alonso, Hamilton, Leclerc. And the difference is not that Alpine don't have as good of a car. I think they do for this track, if not maybe even a better car, slightly. The difference is the drivers. They're going up against teams that have Alonso, Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell, top drivers. And they've got, Ocon and Gasly, 2 very good drivers, but they're not on the same level as those drivers. And those drivers, Hamilton, Alonso, Leclerc, Russell, those type of drivers, and your Verstappens as well, and Norris's, if only Norris could be in a proper front-running car. Those drivers make the difference. Those drivers are able to get the best and extract the best out of a car almost all of the time. When Ocon and Gasly, maybe at best they can do it half the time. But yeah. So I think Alpine have got definitely a quick enough car to be top 5 on the grid. Maybe even fight for the podium. But again, because they don't have quite good enough drivers, I just don't think it's possible for them. So yeah, Ocon, I'm going 7th in qualifying and 8th in the race. Gasly, I think, will be P10 in qualifying and the race. Hope I'm wrong. But yeah, around tracks like this, where the gaps are so small and drivers really make the difference in those type of scenarios where, there's very little in the fight for certain positions. That's one area where Alpine right now are just really losing out on. And it's not Ocon and Gasly's fault. Again, they're very good drivers. They're just not on that elite level with, again, Hamilton, Alonso, Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, Norris, drivers like that. They're just not on that level. So, yeah. But Alpine will definitely be very strong and will be very competitive throughout the weekend. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in practice, they are one of the better teams. But I think when everyone fully shows actually what they have got for the weekend, I don't think they'll be quite in, 3rd or 4th place or anything like that. But it would be really great to see them up there, without a doubt. But before we move on to the rest of the teams, let me come to you guys in the chat, because I can see you guys are saying lots of things, and I want to get to what you guys have to say in regards to this weekend's race. One thing I will say quickly is I can see we're on 32 likes. Let's try and get up to 40 plus likes if we can by the end of the stream. So yeah, if you've not hit the like button yet, make sure to do so, because of course it does help the channel. The more likes, the more wider reach it will get. It does help a lot in the algorithm. So yeah, it would be great if you guys could do that. Yeah, let me go through your comments, pick out some of the best ones. And of course, there is a poll running in the chat as well. Make sure to vote in that if you have not done so already. Sparky Pete saying Max top 3 is a safe bet. Honestly, I think even predicting or betting on him being first is honestly a safe bet. I just don't see anyone getting close to him. He is on a complete different planet to everyone right now. not entirely because of himself. I mean, the car is really good. We don't, we cannot deny reality. But yeah, him in that car is just unbeatable. Robert Heyman says congratulations to Mercedes for hanging in there and incrementally getting more competitive. Yeah, I mean, it makes things more exciting that Mercedes have, got a bit better. But I still can't forgive them for them sticking with that zero pod design. Because again, they wasted 6 months that they could have used to gain on this team, Red Bull. But, they went down a path they thought that would lead them back to glory. But it was never going to lead them back to glory. Laurie Rastogi says, I can't see Ferrari finishing behind Alpine this weekend. I think their straight line speed and qualifying pace is too strong. I mean, I've gone with Ferrari ahead of, Alpine in terms of like the best result Ferrari will get in qualifying of the race. But yeah, I mean, both Ferraris finishing ahead of both Alpine drivers. Honestly, I think they do pretty well to finish up with that out of this weekend's race. Let's find some other comments here. Laurie also saying McLaren have got to hope for rain. Their pace at Monaco was actually pretty good in the wet. Yeah, Lando Norris was super quick. He was like 2-3 seconds quicker than anybody else. And also Laurie saying, I think you're spot on regarding Perez. He was focused on the championship. And as soon as Max demolished Perez's confidence has been crushed. Yeah. I mean, we were saying, though, that, after the first 4 races where Perez, I think, wasn't he... I don't think he was he leading the championship, or was he, like, briefly, like, level on points? I can't remember exactly after Baku what the situation was between Perez and Verstappen in the standings. But, I mean, we knew after those first 4 races that even though Perez was really close to Verstappen, there had been quite a bit of luck on Perez's side for him to be that close, because in Saudi Arabia, Max had a gearbox problem that cost him winning that race, which I think he would have won. And then in Baku, you definitely could argue that Verstappen would have won that race, because what caused Perez to get into the lead of that race was the virtual safety car or the full safety car came out at the right time for Perez to be able to, I think, pit and come out ahead of Verstappen, I think it was. So, yeah, we knew that it wasn't really a legitimate, they weren't legitimately that close to each other. And Max, yeah, in Miami, went out of his way to crush him and has made it one-way traffic since. McLaren F1 races, I've got a feeling in my bones that this won't be Red Bull's weekend. There's got to be some unreliability somewhere. Maybe it's the Horner's turn to have a bit of stress, but Max will win. Of course, how many years ago was it? 9 years ago, Mercedes, after dominating the start of 2014, and of course they did dominate 2014, this was their first race of that year which they failed to win. And all because, of course, they had, I think they lost their ERS, didn't they, with both cars, and were unable to hold on to victory. Hamilton, I think, retired because of a brake problem related to the ERS thing. And then, yeah, Rosberg, of course, was overtaken right before the end by Daniel Ricciardo, who won all of the races that year that were not won by Mercedes. Obviously winning in Canada, Hungary, and Spa. That season, though, Mercedes, except probably for Hungary, in Canada and Spa, they definitely were races that Mercedes gifted to Red Bull. In Hungary, obviously, we had, inclement weather, which definitely helped Red Bull quite a lot. But yeah, Mercedes could have very easily won every race that season. Something Red Bull are trying to do and very well could do in 2023. And I think you may have seen it scrolling along the bottom of the screen on the bottom ticker, a stat that Red Bull have won the first 7 races of the season for the first time in their history, but also it's the first time any F1 team has won the first 7 races of a Formula 1 season since 2019, where Mercedes, of course, won the first 8 races of that season. So, yeah, they will be looking to get past them in the next couple races. Steven says or asks, why should any team, Mercedes, Aston Martin or Ferrari, have the objective to finish second in the constructors? If any of these 3 teams have something cooking, they are more served finishing lower. It is the flaw that comes with the budget cap. Yeah, I agree. It's there isn't as much of an incentive to finish in the best position you can in the championship as they used to be. Because if you were like a small team, like a Toro Rosso, say, and it was coming towards the end of the season and you had the pace because you were still developing that year's car, if you had the pace to maybe jump up from 8th to 6th, then the financial difference that would make would be massive. But yeah, in current Formula 1, because obviously how you finish the season will determine who has the most wind tunnel time and the least wind tunnel time for the first half of next season, there isn't really a massive incentive to climb up the championship. And with Aston Martin, for example, of course, this is the final race before the wind tunnel testing order is changed compared to what it's been in the first half of the season. Obviously, the first half of this year, it's been based on how the championship standings were at the end of 2022. There isn't a massive incentive necessarily for Aston Martin to reclaim second in the championship this weekend, because they'll have a slight bit extra wind tunnel time for the second half of this year if they stay in third after this weekend. So, yeah. But, I mean, I still like the budget cap and the wind tunnel testing regulations. I do like them, and it definitely is making the field closer. There is no doubt about that. But, I mean, everything has its pros and cons. It's not going to be a perfect system. With the wind tunnel testing stuff, though, one team I'm looking out for in the second half of this year is actually this team on screen, Alpine. Because at the minute, they are pretty much on pace and fighting with Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes at the minute. Maybe you could argue that, no, they're not quite on that pace, so maybe they're just a bit away from that. They are 5th in the championship and realistically have no way. Is it realistically? No, officially have no way of finishing or getting up to 4th in the championship before June the 30th. So, with them being so close now to Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, if they can use that extra wind tunnel time well, which they have. Alpine, they have developed this car very well, even so far this season, never mind last season. Alpine might be very quick at the end of this season. They could be one of the top 3 best teams on the grid if they really play it right with their upgrades and they really get it bang on. So, yeah, watch out for Alpine and also McLaren, because they're 6th in the championship and we are expecting a completely new car essentially from them at their home race at Silverstone, which should improve their car, and their pace by a lot. So yeah, it's gonna make things hopefully a bit more exciting. Um, let's find some comments here if I can before we move on. Barky Pete saying, yeah, Red Bull is holding back. Mickey saying, for sure, Red Bull engines are turned down, but how much, who knows? Yeah, we'll never know, but I think without doubt they weren't, going, or they weren't running with as much power or as aggressive a setup with their, engine and fuel settings as Mercedes were in the race. There's absolutely no way, because there'd been no point in risking a reliability issue coming up for Verstappen by pushing so hard. And it's something Mercedes, of course, when they were really dominating Formula One in 2014, 15, 16, something they did a lot, which was run their power unit and their fuel settings a lot more conservatively, because they didn't have to push, because they were so far clear of everybody else. And of course, in qualifying, we're normally miles ahead of the rest. And if they were as quick in the race as they were compared to the rest of the teams behind them, as they were in qualifying, Mercedes would have dominated even harder during that time period. But again, they didn't have to, because they were so far ahead. All they had to do was just make sure they got the front row, got the start right, and then just turn everything down and coast home to the end. That's where Red Bull are at the minute. That's how far clear they are. Mickey says, I think Ocon might finish ahead of the Ferraris. Just got a feeling he's going to have a good race. Paul Phillipson, what if Ocon and Gasly are getting everything out of a poor car and that's as good as it gets? I don't think that's the case. Again, though, I don't think. I don't want people to get the wrong idea of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they never get the best out of the car. There's definitely instances where they do. Ocon in Monaco, for example, was a brilliant example. That was Ocon getting the maximum out of the car, which was a podium finish. Probably Saudi Arabia qualifying as well was another weekend where the maximum was got out of the car with Ocon. Not sure about Spain necessarily, but I mean Gasly did do a really good lap in Q3, but then obviously was relegated 6 spots. Again, some of the time I think Ocon and Gasly, they do get the maximum out of the car, but what separates the best drivers from the next tier of drivers, your Ocons, Gasly's, Perez's, Sainz's, Stroll's, Hulkenberg's, drivers like that, is that those, midfield type level drivers, maybe at most half the time can get absolutely everything out of the car that they, should get, when the absolute best drivers, Verstappen, Hamilton, drivers like that, they're getting the absolute maximum out of their car 99% of the time. So, I don't want there to be a misunderstanding of what I'm trying to say. There's definitely instances where Ocon and Gasly do get the maximum out of their machine, but I just don't think it's anywhere near as consistent as, say, if Alonso was in that car or a Hamilton. Of course, Alonso was in that car last year. Ocon did finish ahead of Alonso in the championship, but a lot of that was because Alonso had quite a lot of bad luck compared to Esteban in 2022. So, yeah, I think, put it this way, if you had Alonso in that Alpine car now, then I think Alpine would be not any higher in the championship, but they would be a lot closer to Ferrari. There is no doubt about that. The gap would not be 60 points. It'd be more like maybe even half of that, like 30 to 40 points or something like that. So, yeah. And yeah, Mickey saying consistency is key, exactly. And that's, again, that's what separates the absolute best. And that's what made Lewis Hamilton at his peak, which was what, 4 or 5 years ago, around 4 or 5 years ago, 2020 you could put in there as well. That's what made him so unbelievably hard to beat, is that even on weekends where Mercedes weren't super quick and weren't miles ahead of everybody else, he was so consistent, qualifying in the race, getting, everything he could out of himself and the car, delivering unbelievable pace all the time, never making mistakes, being absolutely the best at everything, pretty much. That's what made him so hard to beat. And you could argue that even without Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari's mistakes in 2017 and 2018, that because of Lewis Hamilton's consistency during that time, they still wouldn't have won the championship, because, again, Hamilton in that Mercedes car was just so unbelievably consistent. And that's why consistency really is probably the best trait you can have in Formula One as a driver. Because every driver on the grid is capable of a great performance, no matter what car you give them. But not all of them. In fact, again, I'd say probably a quarter of them at most are able to do it consistently week in, week out. And that's what separates the drivers from top to bottom. Yeah, I think those are all the comments, all the best comments that I'm going to go through. But I think, as we're, an hour and 20 minutes into the stream, let's go on to the rest of the teams, which I'm not going to be going into super detail about, because all of these teams I don't think will finish in the points. So, yeah, we're not going to go into loads of detail, because it'll just be a lot of the same stuff, really, about how they'll be not too bad, but not quick enough to finish in the points. McLaren definitely won't be quick enough to finish in the points, because their car just does not suit this circuit. They still have, I think, pretty comfortably the slowest car in a straight line. Of course, this circuit is very straight line heavy. Yeah, they're going to be pretty slow. Oscar Piastri, because he's never raced here before, probably will get knocked out in Q1 and have a pretty poor weekend. Not because he is performing poorly, but because the car, combined with him not having the experience, which is vital around this track, to have a really great result considering the car's pace. Yeah, I think we'll see Piastri have in terms of a result, just a poor result. Lando Norris, looking at history, Lando's never really had a result here in Canada. I think he may have qualified 8th here in 2019. I think he might have done, or 9th. I can't remember exactly where it was on the grid he qualified. But yeah, he's never really had a good Canadian Grand Prix yet. And given that the car just isn't... I mean, even if you put this car on a track where it'd be much better suited to the layout, it's just not a good car. This McLaren car is fundamentally a shit car. So there's not really much these two drivers can do with it. And when you come to a circuit like this, that is probably going to be one of the worst tracks for this car, because we have long straights and also quite a lot of slow corners, which is something the McLaren does struggle with in comparison to other teams. Yeah, I just don't see what's possible for them this weekend. They will need, as someone was saying earlier in the chat, they will need rain for them to be able to do anything of note this weekend. Anything of note being them finishing in the points, of course. So yeah, if you're a McLaren fan, go in this weekend with no expectations, because there is really no hope for you this weekend. And really, with McLaren, we're just waiting for them, or waiting to get until the British Grand Prix, for them to bring this massive upgrade of B-spec car is what we're expecting for the McLaren team. And if that car does show the improvements that it should show, given that it will be such a big upgrade, then I think we'll be able to talk about McLaren in a much more positive light going into the second half of the season. But yeah, at the minute, there's just nothing really positive to say. It's a terrible car with, unfortunately, 2 really good drivers in it. Let's go on to the last 4 teams. Alfa Romeo, Zhou Guanyu, again, I have to give props to him. Brilliant race in Spain. Qualified, I think, 13th, was it? And finished in 9th place. I mean, Tsunoda should have finished in 9th place, but was given the most bullshit penalty possible. And that, of course, is what caused Tsunoda to drop out the points again, having another unfortunate problem costing Yuki points. But yeah, with Zhou, great performance. Really good to see him have a good result. And yeah, we come to this race where Alfa Romeo, not sure, to be honest, if they're going to be that quick at all here. I think they'll probably get one of their cars into Q2, but I'm not sure they'll be able to replicate what we saw quite in Spain. One thing, though, to make note of, I guess, is Zhou, despite last year, this being his first ever race in Canada, again, last year, he, in a wet qualifying, qualified in the top 10 and finished, I think, 8th in that race, just behind his teammate Valtteri Bottas. So, yeah, a brilliant weekend for him. And maybe he'll have, you know, after scoring some decent points in Spain, maybe now that's enough confidence for him to have another good weekend here in Canada. We'll see. It will be probably, though, more difficult for him this time compared to this time last year, where Alfa Romeo had a much better car in comparison to the rest of the field than what they've got at the minute. But yeah, watch out for Zhou. Valtteri Bottas, by the way, the reason he performed poorly in Spain in the race is because he had a broken floor. So yeah, that explains why he finished, I think, 20th and last. Was it 20th or it might have been 19th? I can't remember exactly, but he was basically at the very back of the field. So yeah, Bottas, we can expect him to be better, and we'll see if Alfa Romeo can get into the points once again, but most likely not. They just don't have anywhere near as good of a car as the top 5 teams. And the best team from the bottom 5 teams, I guess you could call them, yeah, the team with the best car, I think for this track, is the Haas F1 team. A team that, I mean, they didn't end up with a good result from the Spanish Grand Prix. I mean, we know why, because they were wearing their tyres out so quickly and were having to make pit stops way too early, and really got, there was cost way too much time having to pit so early and get passed by so many cars in the first stages of the race because they were wearing their tyres out so badly. This weekend, that's not as much of an issue, and Haas at the minute, you have to say, have a pretty good car in qualifying trim, and given that tyre wear will not be as big of an issue this weekend as it was 2 weeks ago, I think Haas have got, you know, if there's any retirements from the top 10, I think they've got a pretty decent chance of nicking a point to go 1 point clear of Alfa Romeo in the fight for 7th in the championship. So yeah, look out for Haas F1. I think they will be better, definitely, than McLaren, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Williams, at least in qualifying. Whether that is the same order in the race, I'm not sure, but definitely the best of the rest after the top 5 teams. There's no doubt about that. Nico Hülkenberg has always been really competitive here, so watch out for him. He was, a few years ago when he was racing here for Renault and Force India, he was always consistently finishing in the points. So, yeah, Hülkenberg should be the main man for Haas. Magnussen has had a couple top 10s here in the past. I think qualified, was it 5th at this race last year in the wet, just ahead of his teammate Mick Schumacher? I think it was 5th. Yeah, so we'll watch out for him as well. But Hülkenberg should be the quicker Haas driver, and Hülkenberg definitely having the better season in 2023. And next, AlphaTauri. Yeah, AlphaTauri should have scored points in Spain, but they were robbed by the stewards for what was a bullshit penalty called on Yuki Tsunoda for pushing Zhou off the track when he literally didn't do that. Zhou drove off the track himself. I still can't believe they actually gave him a penalty for that. Disgusting decision, as far as I'm concerned. Tsunoda, it's such a shame as well, because in Spain, he was one of the best drivers, best performing drivers, really, throughout the field. He was, unbelievable, really. I mean, I think he qualified 15th, and he was up in P9 fighting with an Alpine, which is much quicker, or at least should be much quicker than the AlphaTauri. So, yeah, Tsunoda was so good in Spain. Monaco as well was in P9 ahead of both McLarens, and then had a brake issue. He's had such a good season, but I still feel like he's not getting the results for it. Not because of his own actions, but because of just bad luck and, shit stewarding, as we saw in Spain. So, yeah, with Tsunoda, watch out for him again. I think he'll definitely be one of the higher drivers in Q2, in 12th or 13th place. And maybe, if something happens to one of the top 5 teams, he can nick a point and, get a top 10 finish that, of course, he should have got 2 weeks ago in Spain and even a week before that in Monaco. But Nick De Vries, we'll quickly just talk about him. Do not expect him to have any pace at all, because he has never raced here. So, yeah, I know that if De Vries does deliver horrible pace compared to his teammate and is pretty much at the back, I know people will be ready to absolutely crucify him. But again, let's please remember he's never raced here before. So, yeah, let's not go too hard on him on what's going to be a pretty tricky weekend around the Circuit De Gilles Villeneuve. And we'll finish up with the Williams team. And yeah, good news, a chassis upgrade we're hearing for Williams. And if that does help the performance of the car, Williams should be definitely quite a bit better this weekend than what we saw in Spain. I mean, this track suits their car. The track layout suits their car much better than what we saw in Spain anyway, even if they didn't bring the chassis upgrade. So, yeah, Williams, I think you can expect them to be definitely fighting to get a high position in Q2. I don't think Alex Albon can realistically get into the top 10. Would love to see him do it, but yeah, realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. But I could absolutely see him in 12th or 13th or something like that. I mean, the Williams we know is an absolute bullet in a straight line. And the second and final sector is straight line speed heavy. So, yeah, Alex Albon, watch out for him. Logan Sargent, along with Nick De Vries, he's never raced here before, I don't think, so we can't expect too much of him. But given that Williams should be a lot better this weekend, even though Sargent won't have the chassis upgrade, again, given they should be better for this track layout, I still think Sargent should be putting in a decent performance this weekend. I'm not saying that he needs to get into Q2 or finish in the top 15 or anything like that, but yeah, I think he should definitely not be miles behind at the back of the field. That would be quite a bad performance if he was to be like that this weekend. But yeah, Williams should be better this weekend. One thing I did see, because obviously earlier we were talking about the cost cap. This is not confirmed. I've seen someone say on Twitter that James Vowles, the Williams team principal, has said that Williams has notified and agreed with with F1 and the FIA that they will be breaking the cost cap to update their facilities, as apparently, and again, this is not confirmed. This is not a fact. I just, going off of what someone said on Twitter, which maybe not the best way of reporting something, but this is, I guess, just a rumor to report to you guys. That, yeah, apparently he's showed F1 and FIA personnel around the Williams facilities and claimed that it is 20 years behind other teams. So, yeah, I'll keep you up to date with that story if it continues to develop. But that's the one thing I did see earlier. I'm not sure if he actually did say that. Maybe he did. Not sure how I feel about him or Williams breaking the cap to update their facilities, because, I mean, that is them technically breaking the cost cap to improve their performance, because it will improve their performance, of course, improving the facilities. But with Williams, it just shows you, doesn't it, if that's true, that their facilities are 20 years behind, it shows you why they have been, for the last few years, the worst team on the grid, because their facilities were nowhere near the standard they needed to be at, even to be fighting with teams like Haas, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri. So, yeah, just embarrassing that Williams, since the late 90s, have slipped into what they are now. And it's because of self-harm that the Williams family did to their own team. They just, maybe out of pride, just wouldn't get with the times and maybe wouldn't accept outside help, financial help, whether that's from a massive sponsor or a manufacturer. I mean, Ralph Schumacher did talk about it, I think, on a F1 podcast a couple of years ago, that BMW constantly would be saying to Frank and Patrick, obviously Patrick Head, that they'd be saying, constantly about how much they can help, how much more money they can commit to help Williams and to help the partnership be the success that really it should have been. And it was a failure, that partnership, Williams and BMW, because really that should have been a title-winning partnership, and it never was. And yeah, it was just a massive failure, really. And it's because, I think it was just a pride thing, maybe compared to, and I think also, looking at the past, in the 80s and the 90s, I think maybe it was, Frank Williams not wanting to go back down the road of other partnerships they had in the past with, say, Honda or Renault. But yeah, just sad. But I think we all knew that it was most likely the case that, their facilities were massively behind. One thing I can show you, though, guys, before I go, is Albert Fabrega has just posted a floor comparison for the new Aston Martin floor between the... he's done a comparison between the new Aston Martin floor, the old one, is what I'm trying to say. Let me just get up on screen quickly. And you can see, and he points to here the area that is new. So this is the new one here for Canada and the old one here for Spain. So they've just changed the curvature around this area and the way it flows. And yeah, as I said, I do expect there to be probably a side pod alteration as well. So yeah, that's one of the upgrades that Aston Martin have for this weekend's Canadian Grand Prix. I'll let you know about all the other ones if there are major other upgrades for them, and for all the other teams, obviously, tomorrow and on Saturday as well. But guys, that is your weekend preview for the 2023 Canadian Grand Prix. Before I go, though, let's finish up this poll in the chat. 75 votes we've had, and the question I asked was, who do you think will most likely finish third at the Canadian Grand Prix? And the options were Alonso, Hamilton, Leclerc and Russell, and you guys voted for Fernando Alonso as most likely to finish third with 42% of the vote, Hamilton second with 36% of the vote, and then Leclerc and Russell joint on 10% of the vote. And of course, I agree with your votes. So yeah, thanks for voting. And yeah, that's me done for this evening. But remember, guys, oh no, not that. Wrong slide. Remember my next 2 pieces of content coming on the channel. Tomorrow night, I will be live at 9:45 p.m. UK time for the Practice 2 watch along. And then on Saturday, I'll be live from 5:15 p.m. UK time all the way through till 10:30 p.m. for the Practice 3 watch along, then the qualifying preview, and then a watch along for said qualifying session. And of course, on Sunday, there'll be a race preview and race watch along. And on Monday, another stream as well, reviewing talking points from the weekend and some other stuff probably as well. So make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell if you are new to the channel for that content. And make sure before you go, guys, to smash a like button. And don't forget as well to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5 to keep up with the content on this channel. And don't forget as well to join the Discord server, link below in the description or even in the live chat possibly. But if there is no link being posted in the chat, then just make sure to go to the description and you will find the link that takes you to the Discord for you to join. Yeah, if you want to join our community, we have over 500 people on that server. Then make sure to join, and it would be great to have you, of course, in our growing community. But yeah, that's it for the preview. Until the Practice 2 watch along tomorrow at 9:45 at night, my time, UK time, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.